this. Okay, so we're going to get started. Hello, my name is Yi Chang. I'm the National Field Director for APIAVote, and I want to welcome everyone for joining us today, and thank you for making the time to join us today. APIAVote proudly presents this webinar series. This is called the Mineta Leadership Institute series of webinars. It's a national training program that empowers Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in their communities. This year's programming was made possible by the kind contribution of APIAVote sponsor and member of the board of directors, Glenn Fukushima. And today's webinar is called Get Your Facts Straight, Fighting Disinformation Online. So we have 49 days to go, believe it or not, until Election Day. And so there will be a lot of information out there about voting, election, but there will also be lots of misinformation out there. And how do we fight that misinformation? How do we prepare ourselves to push back on that kind of disinformation that'll be out there? And so part of this webinar will be to identify what are the bad information that are out there floating in social media, and what social media platforms you can use as a tool to make sure that voters in the API community and across the country have access to reliable and true information. So if you can help me, please welcome our guest speaker for this webinar series, Clarissa Worster from Common Cause. She's a social media monitoring manager there. So if you have any questions during the webinar, you can please drop your questions into the Q&A section below. So please welcome and thank you, Clarissa, for joining us and giving us this, I think it's going to be an awesome and important critical information about how to fight disinformation. So, floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Yes, it is so important to be working on this disinformation problem that we're plagued from all angles here. I'm going to share my screen, and then we will begin. Okay. So first of all, Common Cause is partnering with APIAVote to support them and support you all to run your own social media monitoring program. So I'm here mostly to talk about what that process can look like plugging in with APIAVote, and also how you can do social media monitoring on your own, even if you aren't a formal volunteer. So I'm Clarissa. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I'm the program support role at for the social media monitoring program at Common Cause. And if for any reason you need to reach out to me, my email is here. But mostly you can reach out to APIAVote with your questions, and then they'll be tagging me if you need. So represented here, you can see how widespread of a buzzword mis and disinformation is, and how it's present on all sorts of platforms. It's covered, there are bad actors on Twitter, TikTok, WeChat, 4chan, Facebook, and they're all over the place. And it's important to note that there are so many bad actors with different stakes in the game. So we like to say that Russia is, people like to think that Russia is the main actor who is trying to influence our elections, but it's actually incredibly widespread for many, many different reasons. And we also know that marginalized communities, especially voters of color, young people, and students, are especially vulnerable to voter suppression. So this all angles attack on our communities is really something to be concerned about. So before we get too far in, I know what I know about voter suppression and disinformation and misinformation, but I trust that you all know lots about your community and what threats you're facing. So I would love to hear a little bit about what your concerns are about cyber voter suppression, so that we can uplift those and be in reference to those as we're going through here. So I will wait for a moment to see. We have the ability to see answers in the chat, correct? Yes, okay. Always a fun moment waiting for the typing. And if we aren't feeling chatty yet, that's okay. We'll have another moment to hear if we jog your memory on any instances of misinformation or disinformation or general voter suppression concerns you have about your community. And if you type them in along the way, we'll uplift them later. So I will move on, but if I see them, I will return. So Common Cause is heading the social media monitoring program under the National Social Media Monitoring Program under the Election Protection Coalition. And it feels important to contextualize all of the work that we've done in combination with social media monitoring, which includes monitoring every 2020 primary election, which has given us a lot of information about how to do this work and how not to do this work. We've identified and removed hundreds of pieces of mis and disinformation, largely through the next bullet there that says that we've built strong relationships with platforms. So that means the social media platforms. We have direct contacts at, say, Facebook, where when we see a particularly threatening piece of disinformation, we're able to reach out directly and get that removed with greater efficacy than someone just flagging it on their own personal platform. We've also assisted thousands of voters with issues who posted on social media and connected them with our 866-OUR-VOTE and other resources, especially our 888 APIAVote hotline that APIAVote is helping out with and managing. We also have collaborated with rapid response text messaging to voters at the polling place level. And you can see here that there are many fieldwork roles that collaborate with each other. So there's voter text banking and phone banking, there's election administration outreach, there are actual poll workers that we've supported, there are poll monitoring roles and roving poll monitoring roles, and finally social media monitoring. It's just important to realize that this arm of reporting mis and disinformation and supporting voters is part of a larger picture of protecting our elections. But now that we can focus just on social media monitoring, we like to think of these in two different buckets of engagement. The first being voter support, where we are providing proactive voter education online. Another way to think of this is a certain amount of inoculation against the mis and disinformation that we're seeing, especially when we're targeting common narratives that we've seen before. So trying to get ahead of those. And because people who know how to vote, they know the correct information, are much less likely to fall for all of these other attacks and spins afterwards. We also help solve voters' problems online. So people will post on their regular Facebook, I don't know how to vote. And we work to find those people and support and answer those questions directly. And then in the next bucket, we have the fighting voter suppression bucket, which is flagging the misinformation and disinformation online, which ultimately serves to stop the deceptive practices as we're able to report them and send those reports as well to other outlets like lawyers and journalists when appropriate. Okay, so I've thrown around a lot of words, and it's really important to go over the vocabulary. And since we are under the election protection umbrella, it's really important to remember as we're doing this work that this is nonpartisan work at its core. We are not biased towards a particular political group, and we disrupt all mis and disinformation regardless of affiliation. And that's because mis and disinformation anywhere hurts everyone, and this issue is far too important to be partisan. And then misinformation, it's a pretty easy distinction that's easy to gloss over. Misinformation is unintentionally misleading content. So something that might sway someone against voting or understanding how something works, but just simply by confusion or content that's not very clear. Whereas disinformation is going to be intentionally misleading content, where we have a bad actor who is either spreading specifically false information or information that was once true or is sort of true, but ultimately is being manipulated to sway people away from believing that their vote counts. Here you'll see the flow chart that every volunteer goes through on our end for every piece of content they interact with. And this will also be our guide through this presentation. So you can think of our talk here as walking you through the process of being a social media monitor. And whether or not you're doing this directly with APIAVote, Or if you're doing this on your own time, the process will look the same as we recommend it. So the first step here is just finding the content that you want to engage with, which is one of the most complex parts of this process. There's a lot of searching involved to make sure you're using your time effectively. So we like to think of mis and disinformation as an iceberg, where the tip of the iceberg is going to be the public-facing posts, or the posts that our disinformation analysts could find on their own just by using our internet social listening tools. So we can search for public-facing posts and flag them for removal. Whereas the underbelly of the iceberg is what we can't find. So that's going to be image-only content, content that's already been removed, content that is shared within private groups, content in direct messages, and more. And that's where we really need the grassroots power to find the content in the corners of the internet that we wouldn't have access to, and so that you can find the content that's directly impacting you and your communities. I will touch briefly on the social listening tools, both to prepare you for an understanding of what you'd gain access to through working with APIAVote, and just understand the scope of what we are working on. So CrowdTangle is a tool that helps us search Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and also Twitter, though we recommend TweetDeck for Twitter instead. CrowdTangle gives us the capability to search all of the public-facing posts on Facebook and Instagram especially. We then are able to create tailored lists, as you can see here, where you can create lists of bad actors so that we're only monitoring people we know are reliably targeting your community with voter dis and misinformation. But that is something we'd get at a higher level if you're working as a volunteer, since this is a private tool. But it gives us some superpowered searches, which is great. We also recommend using TweetDeck, which anyone who uses Twitter has access to, but allows you also to sort of superpower your search. So when you're on TweetDeck, you'll see columns. You can create many columns across the screen. And at the top, you can do what's called a Boolean search. So you can search for specific terms and look for voting and coronavirus, or you could look for, say, vote by mail or absentee ballots if you wanted one or the other. And then you can filter by location here, and then determine the area to cover around that location. It's of note that when you search this way, you're only getting tweets that are geotagged. So you can also search with the location up here at the top in quotes if you want to also search for things that have been tweeted about in that area but didn't include the geotag. But this tool allows you to target the content you're looking for, as opposed to, you'll hear me say this multiple times, but just scrolling through your own feed, because I'm sure you're following plenty of people who you trust and aren't spreading mis and disinformation, and this allows us to find those other folks, especially on Twitter, where there aren't the private groups that you can be a part of. But then moving away from that, we're going to talk a little bit about the sort of grassroots power angle, where you're going to be searching your own personal platform. So this is that underbelly of the iceberg. It's really important to consider your quote unquote turf, like in field work. And as we know from all sorts of work, it's really important that the communities you are reaching out to and you are putting yourself inside of are your own communities. So you want to make sure that you're joining groups and responding in closed spaces, only to spaces that you belong to. So for example, I would not join a group for Denver moms because I neither live in Denver, nor am I a mother. So I would only join groups that are appropriate to me. It's a meaningful question to think about additional language capacity and who you can reach out to for that. I'll uplift our 888 APIAVote hotline again later. Thinking about who is covering the important platforms and conversation spaces. And this list here is largely geared towards if you were bringing your friends together and wanted to be covering more ground, or the kind of work APIAVote is doing. And I want to assure you that all levels of digital sophistication are good. If you have no interest in learning how to use TweetDeck and have multiple searches going, and you just want to search your own feed, I promise there's mis and disinformation information everywhere, and you can, it's really valuable that we get the content that only you can see. And so if just scrolling is your way, that's okay. But if you want to amp up your personal searches a little bit, we'll go over how to search on Facebook. A big part of this is being proactive and joining local pages and Facebook groups that you would belong to, but maybe aren't already a part of. And when you join those, you can share proactive content. So you could share resources about what the voting in that state is, an FAQ, or just uplifting the 888 APIAVote hotline. And now, when we search, I'll go through and show us how to search on Facebook. If I search on the left here for voter fraud, as I have, I can scroll down and go to posts. And I can sort by date posted. This is really important because you might, if you don't do this, you might get content from, say, the 2016 election that looks like false information, but in fact, it was correct information. It's just no longer relevant. So you want to make sure you're getting things only from 2020. And then I can choose to search only my friends list, my groups and pages, or also public posts here. And then you can also do a tagged location here if you want to do a similar geotagging search to TweetDeck. You can also search photo and video content here, which is significant. Yeah, and that is one way to scale up your search on Facebook, again, so that you aren't just simply scrolling your feed. But again, if that is what you want to do, that is also very useful. Because if you stumble upon something, it's also great to send it off to us. And then on Twitter, it is without TweetDeck, it's the same deal about proactivity here. So you're going to want to follow accounts and hashtags that are relevant to you. And you're going to use the search terms and geography. If you volunteer with APIAVote, when it says See Toolkit here, you will receive a list of search terms that really take some of the mental energy out of this. We've got search strings where you could sit for hours and hours and just type in the new searches and keep turning up new content. But on Twitter, I will show you on the desktop app, the browser interface. If we go to the top here and we search, I will again search in quotes. And just to demonstrate my point, I will say voter fraud and Chicago, which is where I am calling from. And you'll see on the right here, you can filter your search from anyone or just to your followers. Again, using that bit of trust if there are people you already have a relationship with. And you can also filter, in addition to by Chicago, what's near you. So we'd see anything that's coming up about voter fraud in Chicago here. We also can click on advanced search and do some of these more Boolean search terms where we exclude terms or we ask for sort of or options here. You can also filter by language, which is helpful. Yes, lots of ways to tailor your search there that you can play around with. And then Instagram, and I'll take this moment to say, you really don't need to go and learn a new social media platform to do this. I fully recommend that you go where you're comfortable, because that is where you'll be able to find the most information and be the most helpful, and also have the best time doing this work. So on Instagram, we recommend being proactive, again, following relevant hashtags and local Instagram accounts, especially for all of these local election authorities, for sharing proactive content, also finding locals who are sharing lots of misleading information. And it's going to be helpful on Instagram to use the search function for hashtags. So you can search for tags here for vote by mail, vote by mail, vote by mail 2020. And there are going to be a lot of mis and disinformation posts on these sort of seemingly positive hashtags. So you don't only want to search for hashtag voter fraud. Vote by mail or absentee ballot is absolutely going to turn up people who are confused and people who are trying to steer people away from using those methods. And then also we recommend following related and relevant folks. For here would be Common Cause, someone that I would like to think we can trust. And so you're going to want to follow us there to be sharing the proactive content. And then also if you're finding people that are frequently sharing mis and disinformation, you could also be following them. But no need to get into a corner of the internet where you are exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. So definitely when you're following accounts on your personal account, we recommend accounts that you support and want to, whose information you would want to share. No need to go try to infiltrate a scary group. That is for the experts to worry about. Then Nextdoor, everyone's favorite platform to hate. Nextdoor is known for having a lot of mis and disinformation and generally inflammatory content. It's also, precisely because of that, a very important place for us to be monitoring. It's also really key because it's a neighborhood-based network, meaning that you have to join with your personal address. So you're immediately in a hyper-local social media space. And people are more likely to reach out to people in their district or in their neighborhood about voting information because they're probably going to, it's fair to assume that the people near you would have the information that directly applies to you. Now, because this is a hyper-local social media platform, we do not have any automated search tools for Nextdoor. So this is going to be a simple going into Nextdoor and searching your feed and joining proactive groups that apply to you as well. I saw in Nextdoor recently a Chicago crazy cat lady group, and I considered joining to support them on voter suppression. So now we have some other platforms that we want to touch on, which are WhatsApp, Snapchat, Kakao Talk, WeChat, and TikTok. These are all sort of tricky platforms to monitor because they don't have robust search tools. That doesn't mean that they aren't a place we should be, because these are incredibly vulnerable platforms for mis and disinformation, especially because of their inherently closed nature and a lot of the anonymity associated with them. So our process for all of these platforms is to stay in your chats and seek out others. And as you see mis and disinformation, you're going to flag it as you would any other way, such as taking a screenshot and submitting it. But we'll get to reporting later. So while we're in the process of developing more resources on these, the important thing to know is just when you see it, send it on. When in doubt, report it, and spending your time scrolling through your personal feeds here for your chats is really important. All right. So that was plenty about how we find content, and now we'll move on to determining what kind of content you're coming up against and then what to do with it. So first we have content that is a partisan attack or a non-voting related piece of disinformation. So we've got some examples here of a poll that says, like a very dubious poll that says 55% believe that Biden potentially has early stages of dementia. While we might be concerned about this content otherwise, for other disinformation reasons, it's not something that is directly contributing to people not voting in the election. So we wouldn't want to uplift this into our election protection umbrella. And then on the right here, we have a post about people trying to incite people not to wear masks for COVID-19. And while we would be very concerned about mis and disinformation about the COVID-19 pandemic, there are other folks who are focused on that, whereas we are focusing on protecting the election. So for both of these sorts of content, we would ultimately ask that you ignore this and trust that that is someone else's job. Then, when you find a voter-related problem or some misinformation that's actually posted in good faith, you have reason to believe that, we've got another path for you. Here are some examples. So on the upper left, we've got someone asking about how they haven't received their absentee ballot and wondering if they could still go in to vote in the early election. So this is something that if you had resources about your local process, you could uplift it, or you could send people to the hotline. Other examples are people reporting issues at the polls themselves. So if you asked for a mail-in ballot but didn't get it, come to vote, they're having great issues verifying people to vote, having to call an elections department, etc. Not good. Myself and poll workers not sure what to do. So this is an instance where we could support someone, and we could also work to verify that this is correct, because that's an important part of this process to make sure something doesn't get bumped to be disinformation. But sending hotlines for this sort of thing is ideal. And then now for this misinformation that's well-intended, this is an example we recently saw in the New Hampshire primary. This poster, who we otherwise trust, posted that the polling was from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. when actually the voting hours were 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is something really concerning because someone could plan incorrectly and end up thinking they couldn't vote when actually they could still have gone. All right, now that we've established what that content would look like, we'll move to the part where you interact, which is providing the correct voting information from trusted sources. So when we're answering these questions, those questions are often about polling place times, about ID requirements, about provisional ballots. And for a lot of things, when in doubt, we're going to send people to our hotlines, especially the 888 API-Vote hotline for their questions, because we don't all have to be experts. We have experts on call. We've created this voter assistance formula. So I know it can be daunting for me to think about reaching out to a stranger on the internet who you otherwise might feel a little invasive reaching out to. So we've got a formula on the left here where we ask that you identify yourself, you empathize with this situation, you give them the correct information, and then you link to a trusted source because, as we know, there are lots of bad actors online, and we want to establish that we are not those, that we are in fact spreading good information. And then a really important one is at the bottom here, reinforcing the importance of still voting. So this reads here, "Hi, @Linda12, I'm a volunteer with @Election Protection. I totally understand how confusing absentee voting can be." Then you'll say, to answer your question, while you requested an absentee ballot, you can still go to the polls and vote in person. Your absentee ballot will be set aside and not counted. And then we link to the trusted sources where they could find more information at www.elections.newyork.gov or by calling 866-RVOTE, or if it's helpful, 888 API-Vote, and then hoping that they'll still take the opportunity to make your voice heard. It's so important. This formula gives me a lot of ease, so I hope that it can help you as well. And then our hotlines are if there's one thing to take away from today, it's that you can share these hotlines. There's the 888 API-Vote, which has many Asian languages, including Bengali, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Hindi, and Urdu. We also have different hotlines for 866-RVOTE in English, 888 APIAVote in Spanish, and 844 Yalla Us for an Arabic and English hotline as well, in case you find folks who need those as well. And we've got lots of graphics that if you're volunteering with APIAVote that you can share, like the post on the right here, to have a little extra validity to your post. Now, when you find good faith misinformation, formula for your response is going to be just a little bit different. So on the left, you're going to identify yourself, provide the correct information, link to trusted sources, and then request that they remove it. So you can see here, I'll just highlight the differences. You're going to want to say something to the effect of, "Unfortunately, this information does not appear to be true. The polling places today are actually 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then when requesting the removal, you're asking someone to please either edit the post or remove it so that others are not confused. And it's important to help them understand why removing it might be important. We also recommend direct messaging people in addition to commenting on their post. And I will again say that this is only for good faith misinformation. If you don't have reason to believe that someone's intentions were good or that this is simply a symptom of confusion, that's going to go into our next bucket of engagement, which is when something is actually harmful voter disinformation. So there will be lots of examples here. Now, to represent what we're up against. So one major way that people are spreading harmful disinformation about the voting process is creating questions or misinformation or disinformation about voting methods. So you'll see on the left here an advertisement for people claiming that people can text to vote, which along with this one on the right, where there's a claim that Democrats vote on Wednesday. These are both things we've seen many times. And it's extra important to note that due to the pandemic, these might actually seem to have more validity, because you might think, oh, they want to reduce people at the polls. So these are really harmful. There's also a large campaign right now to discredit vote by mail. You'll see on the left, this is a video from trying to quote unquote steal the election. The postal worker is dumping mail into the trash in this video. It turns out, after lots of digging, this was actually a video from, I believe, 2014, and an apprentice postal worker for a week or so was doing this at the end of their shift, and they were promptly fired, and it had nothing to do with ballots, and it's an incredibly rare and specific case. And then here on the right, we've got this video and post that's been going around of people claiming that they themselves have been a master at fixing mail-in voting. And this is something we're seeing getting a lot of circulation, and ultimately discrediting the process of vote by mail might discourage people from voting at all if they're concerned about showing up to the polls during the pandemic, or generally not having faith in the process. There's also really concerning threats of voter intimidation at the polls. These are both examples of people claiming that ICE will be at the polls. We also see this with threats of militias and police. And these are tricky when we live in a very scary world. And while there could be reason for concerns for this, that's where we have a rapid response network where we're able to search and make sure that these threats are not real, but most of the time they're fabricated in an attempt to steer marginalized folks away from the polls, which is very, very concerning. So these are really important to flag so that we can get to the right information and make sure to get them taken down. Another tactic is seeking to depress turnout at the polls. So this is an example from the 2016 election. Russia's Internet Research Agency created an account called Blacktivist many months ahead of the election, where they were just generally posting pro-Black content. And then a few weeks before the election started using their base, who had come to them for pro-Black content, and steering them away from voting. So this sort of manipulative trust or just general discouraging of voting is also disinformation that we want to uplift. So I'm gonna try out hearing from you again if you're feeling a little more warmed up, so you can hear more than just my voice. I would love to hear if there are other examples of mis and disinformation in your community that you'd like everyone else on the call to hear, or for me to hear, to include in future presentations.
So Clarissa, I'll just read a question from Raymond.
Yeah.
He said, do you have any data on the amount of or the extent of social media or disinformation, misinformation this year? And if you can provide examples of the most egregious examples of these campaigns, especially directed to people of color.
Yeah, I do not have statistics on hand for the reach of this year, but I will say there have been some concerning reports of robocalls in key states where they're targeting people of color, voters of color, and they are calling to say that their robocalls discouraging people from voting or telling them that they're not eligible to vote, for example. So that's an example of a really targeted attack, and the steering away from the correct times of voting, or the voter intimidation, and there was one other example I was going to name, but I can make sure to, because we have disinformation analysts with many more complex reports about what we're seeing. And when I send along my packet after this presentation, I can make sure I can ping our representative on that front to try to give a little more concrete for this year specifically.
Great.
Let's see, any
Another
other
question? Let's see, here's another question from Don. What is the best way to deal with people posting a lot of unvetted, unchecked, and false information?
I think we
How
are.
do you deal with people? Yeah.
I think we're about to cover that. So that's a brilliant segue. And largely, it looks like reporting it to the platforms and to our disinformation analysts, because we aren't looking for fights online, and we definitely don't want to amplify misinformation. The only way, if you want to, you can only engage if you think that it's going to have an impact and people are likely to change. Otherwise, we're just amplifying what they're saying. Yeah. Okay. I will, unless there are other questions that I'm missing, I will move on, and we'll have more chances for questions. And I didn't say at the beginning, but please type your questions in throughout. And if you want to tag me and let me know if I'm not able to see it, I'm happy to be paused at any time. Okay, so now what to do with harmful disinformation. That is going to be, we do not want to amplify or engage in any way, which I know feels a bit counterintuitive, because I think of a lot of this work as sort of cyber bystander intervention, where our impulse is to step in, but because of the rules of social media, that isn't actually the most effective method. Because anytime we engage on social media, we are engaging in amplification of that content. Because on social media, interactions are currency. So we aren't going to comment, we're not going to react, or you do not want to share and debunk, especially because this amplifies the content by any interactions are favored by the algorithm. So say you see something really egregious and you share it on your Facebook page, and your caption is, "What garbage, this is nonsense, we have to disrupt all of this disinformation going around." But that now means that post is being seen as something that people want to engage with, and the platforms don't distinguish between positive engagement and negative engagement. So they'll start pushing that content even further, because they think it's something that people want to see. It also can simply create further confusion, because a lot of times that little caption you do is pretty small, where versus the large image or text that you're sharing. So people might only see the disinformation and not your debunking. So they might think that you're supporting the disinformation. And it also can just be confusing to be a new thing to be navigating if people weren't interacting with that disinformation prior. And then we get to completing the incident report form or submitting a tip. And these tips, I'm going to for a second explain Junkipedia, which is this really incredible tool developed by the Algorithmic Technological Institute. It's a collaborative platform for collecting, monitoring, analyzing, and responding to problematic content online. This tool is not only for election protection, but we have our own portal within it to be collecting all of this mis and disinformation. And this is where we pool data, where we then we're able to build narratives of really pervasive accounts of voter mis and disinformation, or even voter confusion. And then we can reach out to the platforms to remove that content or push other proactive content. And we also are able to use those narratives to pass that on to lawyers and journalists, and then create this sort of endless cycle of new inoculation content. So inoculation meaning that if we see a lot of people are claiming that postal workers are able to dump out mail, we might, with our messaging and media experts, create some messaging that's geared towards preparing people to know that that's not true without uplifting the content itself to explain it. But that's something that our experts are working on. So Junkipedia, the main way, if you If you don't end up getting involved with APIAVote, or you just want to, tell your mom that maybe she should consider when she sees something submitting somewhere, there's going to be a web tip line embedded into APIAVote's website. We have a common cause tip line as well. These are customizable, and anyone can submit tips into the collaboration platform. And these tip lines take the form of web, email, text, and WhatsApp. So if you are going to be working through APIAVote, I did want to uplift that we also have internal social media monitoring report forms that are a little more complex, but it's just a higher level of engagement that you can look forward to if you plug in. The specific APIAVote tip lines that you can submit to, or you could boost on your own website or send to your networks, going to be found on the web at www.junkipedia.org/tips/APIAVote. This will also be linked on APIAVote's website itself. We're going to be using this email, so hotline@apiavote.org, where you can just send on a screenshot of what you found and a link. And then we'll soon have a WhatsApp tip line where you can submit tips directly inside of WhatsApp, which is an ATI line that election protection is allowed to use, as opposed to being APIAVote specific. But stay tuned for that one. And that brings us to the end here, where I'll just reiterate the ways that you can get involved are directing your community to APIA Junkipedia tip lines, or you can go to www.apiavote.org to request to join APIAVote's program with volunteers. Oh, and I remembered something key that I wanted to note about submitting tips, which just for a moment, if you found content that is in a language other than English, our translation capacity is growing. But if you're able to do some of that translation when you submit tips, that's really helpful. But it's helpful no matter what. So send your tips regardless. Okay, that is what I have. So I would love to welcome any questions that you have. I will stop sharing my screen. And also, if you have anything to add that is specific to your programming, I support that as well.
So Clarissa, there's another question that was in the Q&A section, and it says, what percentage of campaigns use anonymizers?
Anonymizers is actually a term that I'm not familiar with. So I'm largely evidencing that you can, be a proponent of this work without being an expert in all things disinformation, but you could still be helpful. But I will do some more research there. Do you have any insight?
Maybe Raymond, if you can expand on that, if you're still on here. Raymond Ocampo, if you can expand on what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Typing it in.
Any other questions anybody has? If you have questions, you can just drop it in the chat or in the Q&A. Otherwise, I have a couple of things I want to share also. Clarissa, is that the end of your presentation?
It is.
Okay. Okay. I have a link that I'd like to share for folks to sign up on our relational organizing tool that we're using called Outreach Purple. So I'm going to pull that up and share that. And it'll also have, a little bit of information about how to sign up. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see.
And Raymond, you could ask your question. I allowed you to speak.
Oh, what I was referring to was primarily email, which makes anonymous the source of the information. And I'm not sure whether that's available on social media sites or because the nature of social media sites require non-anonymous postings. So I just wanted to know, how whether you can always track the source of the misinformation or disinformation.
We definitely can't at our level always track if someone is who they say they are. It's likely that there are people that we're reporting who are not who they say they are. There are higher level analysts who are able to track that, especially by sometimes we'll see posts that are the exact same shared by about 20 different profiles at once. And that's an example of a time that we might be looking at a different sort of covert network. But ultimately, I think we're at this level less concerned with who is sharing the disinformation and more concerned with who it's reaching and how we can disrupt that reach.
Thank you.
Great. Are you all seeing this? This is a, oh, I can't, here we go. So you can join as a partner, you can join to be part of the Disinformation Army, and you can sign up here with APIAVote. So here's a link to sign up to help.
Oh, I don't think you're sharing.
Oh, I thought I shared it. Okay.
Here, I could go ahead and do it.
You can share, see if you can share from there. I don't know why I can't share it. Okay, there we go. So if you can jot that down, we'll also have this recording available, so you can sign up with us to be part of our Disinformation Army. And if you can go to the next screen also, Christine. This is also, we're launching our personal relation organizing tool. And so if you can, you can go here and also sign up to be part of this. This is a way for us to connect with our families and friends and push out information about the voting process. And this is a really good way to just get in touch and share information instantly. And so we have a training on this. So if you're interested in that training and how to be specific information about how to sign up for this relational organizing tool, please let us know, email me or any one of us, and we'll provide that training for you. Also, Christine, if you can go back to the first slide, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank two of our other sponsors that I didn't mention before. And it's the National APA Bar Association and the South Asian Bar Association for co-hosting this event today. And of course, a special thanks to Clarissa and Common Cause for getting this really critical information to all of us that we can definitely use in the next 49 days as we head towards election. So thank you again to Common Cause and Clarissa for a wonderful presentation. Are there anything else? Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll come to the end.
I have a quick question. This is Don.
Okay. Oh, hi, Don.
Hi. So what makes certain people prone or, gullible to believing false information and, sharing them? So is there a particular, group of people that are gullible or easy to believe in false information?
I would frame this less as certain populations or groups of people being more gullible, and there being groups who are targeted with disinformation and misinformation at a greater scale, and also and the combination with maybe receiving fewer proactive voting posts or resources that are targeted towards supporting understanding of voting. So for example, young voters maybe haven't on their platforms aren't seeing lots of pro-voter content or answers about how the process works, and it's new to them. Another example would be resources not being translated for folks in other languages outside of English, which, yes, I don't think that there are groups that are more gullible, I think there are groups that are more disenfranchised and are being targeted at a greater extent.
I ask that question because I have certain friends who seem to be more fact resistant than other friends. So I don't know if there's a specific, I don't know, why are they fact resistant?
Hmm. Am I correct in interpreting fact resistant as they are believing and uplifting disinformation rather than being confused?
Yeah, because even if you provide them facts or the correct information, links to the correct information, or even, videos of Trump, for example, speaking exactly what they're saying that Trump didn't say that, for example, but they just don't believe it. They just believe whatever they want to believe.
I definitely.
You must have friends in the White House.
Yes, I very much empathize with that, and I would say that even when it's someone close to us, that still, at least for my purposes, falls under the umbrella of disinformation, where it's maybe not helpful to engage and rather helpful to report it so that we understand the reach of those unfortunate facts. If you have a relationship with someone and you're invested in their growth on their understanding of voter suppression and protecting the election with them, I think that's outside of the scope of social media monitoring, though. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Tough, though. I hear you.
My sympathies, Don.
If there's one more question from Tian Kai. We have many friends and family who are doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, scientists who are not gullible, but they still believe what they want to believe. So it's more of a comment here.
Yeah, there's that. This definitely is in conversation with the distinction between mis and disinformation, because if someone is willfully engaging with information for their own goals, that's very different than someone being aligned with equitable access to elections and simply sharing the wrong information.
Yeah. Okay, Christine, any last words?
Hi, everyone. No, this has been amazing. I think we need to continue, and hopefully with everyone that's here today, we could go ahead and recruit additional individuals that could help us, and so we can educate them and learn about what we need to look out for. I think many people in our community don't even realize that they are being presented with disinformation. So sometimes it's just really hard for us to identify that. So I think I just want to thank once again the Common Cause, and you did a great job in terms of thanking all of our partners. But nothing more than please sign up. We really could use everyone's help and involvement. And also, just as a reminder, next week is National Voter Registration Day. So we are asking, and we'll be pushing out a lot of content and encouraging all of you to also uplift, to start those conversations and making sure that your friends and family are vote ready and are registered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Clarissa.